Okay, I think as we wait for the last few folks to get settled in, what a great crowd. This is wonderful. So good evening. Welcome to the Moderns exhibition lecture series here at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. Thank you for being here. It's beautiful outside, and you all came inside for this. And we have dueling lectures with the Kimball tonight. So I'm biased, but I totally think that y'all chose well. We're really, really glad that you're here. As everyone's settling in, I just want to remind you to turn off your cell phones. Turn those ringers off. Otherwise, we'll look for you. We'll see you when it happens. So this evening, I am very honored to present the acclaimed artist Alex Da Corte, who will be presenting Cadavre Exquis, which will be immediately followed by a conversation with Alison Hearst, the organizing curator for Alex Da Corte, The Whale, here at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth. If you had not had opportunity yet to see the exhibition, good news. It is open until 8 p.m. tonight, so when the lecture is finished, you all are welcome to go into the galleries and view The Whale. Also, grab one of the books from the shop. They're beautifully blue exhibition catalogs in the shop with some incredible, oh, yep, I see someone in the back holding theirs up, like the prize that it is, so be sure and check that out as well. So Alex Da Corte, The Whale, marks the first comprehensive museum exhibition to explore Da Corte's dynamic relationship with painting. Spanning the past decade, the exhibition features over 40 paintings, drawings, and a video work that examine painting as a performative act. Internationally recognized for his interdisciplinary installations that merge these seemingly disparate forms of making, Da Corte's work draws from art history, design, and pop culture. His pieces blend fantasy with darker undertones, while traversing high and low cultural themes. In The Whale, Da Corte views painting as a space that captures cultural ghosts, referencing the Jungian concept of a journey into the subconscious, akin to the mythical belly of the whale. So tonight, Da Corte presents Cadavre Exquis, a term rooted in the surrealist tradition. Cadavre Exquis, or as many of you might also know it, The Exquisite Corpse, is a collaborative drawing game developed by surrealist artists in the early 20th century, where participants sequentially contribute to a composition without seeing or having knowledge of the previous contributions. A method of making that fosters unexpected juxtapositions and surreal imagery, embracing chance and collective creativity. The relationship between Cadavre Exquis and collage is significant. Both involve the assemblage of disparate elements to create new, often unexpected narratives that blur and break edges through the act of destroying and remaking. In his practice, Alex Da Corte embraces disrupting conventional artistic boundaries and infusing his work with a sense of playful collaboration, transformation, and discovery, blurring all of the edges. Born in Camden, New Jersey, and currently living and working in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the reach of Alex Da Corte's work spans the globe. Some selected solo exhibitions from just the last few years include Earworm at MoCA Toronto. Oh my gosh, that's me. I'm a teacher. I want you to learn from example. Lordy. So let me start this over. So some selected solo exhibitions from just the last few years include Earworm at MoCA Toronto in Canada, Kermit the Frog, Even. Oh no, we're doing bad tonight, y'all. Kermit the Frog, Even at Friederichsmuseum in Kassel, Germany. World Leader Pretend at Gio Marconi Gallery in Milan. The Damon Matthew Marks Gallery in Los Angeles, California. Fresh Hell, 21st Century Museum of Contemporary Art in Kanazawa, Japan. Mr. Remember, Louisiana Museum of Modern Art in Hulebek, Denmark. Denmark. Roy G. Biv in Luma Westbau, Zurich in Switzerland. American Speech at Sadie Cole's HQ in London. The Modern is so pleased to be the newest addition in this long list of exhibition accolades that now includes Alex Da Corte, the whale. So now, please join me in welcoming Alex Da Corte as he presents Cadavre Exquis.
Bing, 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 bing. Can we lower the lights, please? Make it spookier. It's a small world, but I wouldn't want to have to paint it, remarked the comedian Stephen Wright. In 1988, I found myself in a whale for the first time. It was not, of course, the whale that torments Ahab or seeks Andromeda. It was Mary Blair's whale, the beloved Old Mill boat ride, It's a Small World. Originally conceived in 1964 for the New York World's Fair and later reimagined in Disney World and Disneyland, this water ride takes visitors on a tour of her world, wherein hundreds of animatronic children sing a song of peace and brotherhood. I myself did not find peace there in the hot, sticky Florida summer, and yet it seems I have absorbed much of Mary Blair's color sensibility. A few years later, I embarked on what would be my first painting, an ambitious mural covering my bedroom walls and ceiling, modeled after Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel masterpiece, The Last Judgment. I was 12. With cheap acrylic paints, paper plates, and plastic jewel cases at my palette, I set forth color mixing and painting each and every Disney villain. It would become my obsession. For years, making charcoal or pastel studies in my drawing pads and then transferring these characters to the wall, collaging them together to make a colorful map of those evil and flamboyant characters. I did not realize at the time that many of those characters were modeled after queer archetypes and voiced by queer allies and drawn by queer animators, and yet somehow I was drawn to them. They were, for me, representative of the small world I wanted to live in. They were my whale. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung's 1952 book, Answer to Job, likens the figure of Job, a man so dispossessed and at the will of a God who is both benevolent and vengeful, to one consumed by a whale. He supposes that in the darkened space inside the belly of the whale, one might leave one's ego, leave one's persona, leave one's taste even, and become reborn in time and eventually find oneself on the sand. How do we define our taste? How do we choose our favorite color? What does it mean to absorb, to consume, and to hold these colors in our minds and then set them free? What does it mean to paint? To cover the world? To capture light? to capture darkness. In a 1978 interview with Lee Krasner, Barbara Lee Diamondstein Spielvogel says, "You often said you can't be trusted with your own work for any period of time, and I assume it is a less than whimsical reference to the fact that in 2 major periods you have taken earlier work and cut it up, destroyed it and remade it. What made you decide to do something like that?" Lee responds flatly, "It wasn't a decision. It happened, and then I observed what I did." "Well, can you tell us about the first time, what you did?" Murder. "Well, on the first occasion, I had the studio hung solidly with drawings, floor to ceiling all around. I walked in one day, hated it all, took it down, tore everything up and threw it on the floor. And when I went back, which was a couple of weeks later before I walked through that studio door, it was seemingly a very destructive act. I don't know why I did it, but I certainly did it." "I had a dream. I was a werewolf. My body changed with the tides. The world happened to me, and I just waited. At first not, of course. I resisted. I tried to hide. The edges of my body held tight as I wanted them to be, but the moon insisted. And soon, those edges began to recede. The shape of my life transformed, adhered to some larger wax." In the late 19th century journal More Magic, written by Professor Hoffman, an English-born lawyer and magic theorist, one is invited to discover ways to command candle fire, bewitch a skull, bend a spoon, or even turn back the hands of times. As Hoffman writes, everything comes easy to a conjurer, and yet I wonder, after reading, if that is really so, for the world to me remains a secret which I desire to divine. So I roll up my sleeves and turn to page 172. In this particularly verbose entry, Hoffman describes the mysterious tumbler, or to pass a coin from a glass of water into the center of an orange. The trick requires some shenanigans and sleight of hand, an audience willing to believe in what they see, of course an orange in a glass of water, and the performer bending the edges of their optics. What is revealed to me upon this divination is the remarkable mutability of edges and, indeed, everything that I had perceived to be rooted in the ground in a planar world. Just as photographer Oscar Gustav Rejlander, in his multi-layered glass-pane photo collages of the 1850s, revealed there could be 2 ways of life, I propose rather there be 3, or 4, or so many more, in and out of the glass. Today, I would like to consider painting and collage in the performative sense, with more tearing and chaos and fewer straighter lines, as a social and anthropological mode for translating and moving through the world, with the diasporic body defying the notions of the edge and the fixed. Trinity Minha notes, in regard to translation, that you are constantly in the position of mediator and translator. If one recognizes the impossibility of translation in one's work, it becomes an interesting work, one that is situated at the edge of no longer being valid. Offering something valuable while questioning its validation is a way of depositioning while positioning. So how do we define this depositioned, invisible, bendable, metaphysical, and yet physical space of this age through the canonical lens of collage? That practice art historian Yuval Etgar describes as a technical procedure based on cutting, arranging and pasting papers, pictures, and other materials on a flat surface. We must define it through notions of the performative and the expanded sculptural field, where material flexibility and 21st century mutability allows for new slang and vocabulary to break away from planar processes. And uncutting, jump cutting, scissoring, swishing, breaking, loping, daggering, and bouncing become viable modes for 3 and 4th dimensionality to exist, embodied and woven into collages we also call blocks, quilts, families, schools, assemblies, and parties. Here I am, the diasporic Dadaist aloft on the Z-axis, off the structured grid of paper and glue, positioning and repositioning myself in the expanded field of collage, amassing new edges through time and allowing old edges to recede. It is a result both planned and unplanned, motivated by chance and authored by no one, anyone and everyone. As I search for the kitchen knife, behold, Marisol's dinner date, where replicants eat for free and stay forever. What is the expanded collage field? Rosalind Krauss invented the concept of the expanded field in an effort to articulate the wavering outline of the medium of sculpture as inaugurated by Brancusi's pedestals and their relation to the floor, and then the spread and redefinition of those edges and their subsequent iterations. Collage, an expanded field, outside of its etymological glue and tinkering, can locate some of its physical depositioning in practices begun by artists and performers of the 1950s, the 1960s, and the 70s, who righteously questioned the capacity of the frame and its limits. In Benny Andrews' 1989 notes, My Working with Collage and Its Meaning as I See It, he explains his painting, Janitor at Rest, from 1957. He had been working on a painting that had been increasingly polished, on the verge of becoming a Renaissance painting. In an attempt to introduce a problem into the painting, he left the classroom, walked down to the janitors whom he was trying to paint, and returned with some of their hand towels, which he incorporated onto the smooth, stretched surface of the canvas, allowing him to be present and respond to a new and alien surface in real and meaningful ways. Collage me have always been out of whack or out of place, or misplaced, or an intrusion, or alien, or almost right, he writes. But also interesting, but brash, crass, crude, clever, and on and on. Well, collage, I have that in common. Rough, disconcerting physical forms placed on a clean, pure, white, finely painted oil surface is like an intruder coming into the right place, even if invited. Collage me very often doesn't adhere, and if so, not for long. This is not all bad, because not sticking allows for immediate mobility, less responsibility, and more opportunities for many, many things that the forever stuck cannot get away to partake in. For me, the space between the painting classroom and the janitor's closet becomes the performative space of the body, the collage glue, which tethers the two, allowing to pull his existence into his work. The space of the invisibility is the metaphysical space of possibility, which I understand collage to be. See Robert Rauschenberg's Factum 1 and Factum 2 as another example of the vernacular dance of collage, imperfect repetitions of each other existing on either side of the continental United States, in Los Angeles and New York. Their connection, as Jonathan T.D. Neal notes, renders the map as a combine itself, one more patchwork unity produced through constant addition and alteration, through depositioning and defying edges, allowing Rauschenberg to displace the given homogeneity of the modernist picture plane with a heterogeneous dispersal of whatever is out there in the world. Wherever you go, you are. And that search may be endless. Life in the glass age is boundless, without edges. At best, it is a site for hope and opportunity, but we carry the histories of our lives and those of our forebears with us, and whatever is out there is ours to shoulder or tear apart. A vernacular dance. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither for nor towards. At the still point, there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement. And do not call it fixity. Where past and future are gathered is the shape of coincidence. The German astronomer and mathematician Johannes Kepler gave this conversion of past and future a name. The rhombic dodecahedron, a 12-faced geometric solid, also known as the shape of coincidence, is something Kepler discovered in his attempt to interrogate and define the underlying harmonies of the cosmos. I liken Kepler's dodecahedron to other sites for collage conversions, from the communal honeycomb hives of a bee to the patches of worn and weather silks and cottons stitched together to make a crazy quilt. Collaborative and communal collage have long been models for reducing edges and renegotiating ways in which togetherness can overcome alienation. If Alan Caprow's essay, The Legacy of Jackson Pollock, ushered in a more participatory way of acknowledging the out there by forever unstucking the framed within the site of painting, by employing the everyday and all modes of play as potential collage elements, consider Teresa Berga's text-based proposals for sculptures and dances, including estructuras, acciones primarias, and work that disappears when the spectator tries to approach it from 1970, as a response to the colonial takeover that were the early 1960s happenings. Berga favored an alignment with the shape of coincidence, where participation also equals consent and harmony. She aimed to use the apparatus of capturing, orienting, and intercepting as a means for promoting flexibility within the given structure that is reliant on participation of the viewer, where experience or completion of the cycle of thought is reliant on collectivity. In an attempt to recognize the constant shifting borders, boundaries, and edges, where collage is oftentimes happening invisibly underfoot, look to Dara Birnbaum's Rio video wall from 1989 and Rammellzie's manifesto Ionic Treatise from 10 years prior. Birnbaum's now lost Rio video wall was the first large-scale outdoor video installation, a monumental square grid of 25 monitors. The monitors received two different layers of imagery that interacted in a play of constantly shifting digital edits. One set of images was a live feed of a satellite downcast of CNN News. The other of landscape shot by Birnbaum on the site where the video installation sat, a once natural setting that had become a shopping mall. A third disruptive performative thread of this work was the incorporation of two live closed-circuit surveillance cameras that revealed pedestrian silhouettes as they walked through the shopping mall plaza. Here, the multiverse is born, and the edges of time are disabled and blurred, and like Ray Lander's photo montages, the two ways of life become endless. Similarly, the legendary Afrofuturist graffiti writer Rammellzie advocated in his Ionic Treatise for an urgent production of picture and words as a model for reviving life's fullness, in tandem with the ever-changing pulse of the city. Graffiti, often performed in the invisibility of night, in the case of Rammellzie on subway cars, acts as another kind of gestural knife, cutting the urban landscape with a boundless wrinkle of paint. For every brick laid, a new language, a new sign. A new wild style is formed to cut the forever stuck. To be forever unstuck. I wonder as I write this and begin to swing the axe, stab the knife and swish the scissors, cutting away at the roots of my body that had been tethered to the ground. Swimming now, unstuck. I float. I look around. In darkness, I wait. I play a game in my mind, something I liken to Cadavre Exquis, where I'm paging through Lucy Lepard's essay on Ree Morton, one she made for Made in Philadelphia, an exhibition from 1973. Morton was an artist and an educator who herself worked around the undefined edge of matter and her mind to conjure the metaphysical by way of the natural world. Lepard, in describing Morton's work, plays a word game, in prose, dissecting and expanding on Morton's name, re, as the Latin prefix re, meaning both backward and again. Let me deconstruct Da Corte in the spirit of re, in the hopes of going backward again. First, there is da, being the third person singular derived from the Spanish dar, to give. And secondly, corte, the noun meaning cut. To give and cut. To which I say, daff, 2 spaces or more. Darn this space. Day's end that space. Dangle of frames. Danger from weight. Darby flat and rounded. Dartle from wall. Daub the sources. Day spring nature. Dash from vision. Dazzle centerings. Decry the inaccessible. Daughter images. Decrypt otherness, defend other paths. Decolonize from the past, darling sculpture. Double drawing, dabble experience, dance experience. Date what happened here. Dawdle then vertical, decor to the left, daily double to the right, not daddy. Deliver dispersion, daffy into the wall, then into the room. Defer containers, deign heroics, deflect distance, downward dog, muscular consciousness, divorce divisions between wall and floor. Damn my associations, dang. Dapple porches, forest, fences. Desist constriction, dandy clearly. Digital to analog where possible. Duck's ass, familiar but unknown. Days the future, dawn the present. Daemon the last space, changing it. Defy one order, Dagwood illusion, divine reason. Dot I daw, duddy dat goes only so far. Dotted lines relent, deflate, sculpture, life, but, day still, daffodils, order, daisy the boundaries, daunting hills, dada the last line, dappy and self-contained. Whoosh! Lightness, blinding light, blinking, sunspots in my eyes, salty tooth, sand in my toes, laid flat, a mouse underfoot, spat out. A road, you, I enter upon. I look around. I believe you are not all that is here.
We have come a long way from what we actually felt. The Christian monk John of the Ladder once said, "Take a hard stone with sharp corners, knock it and rub it against other stones until its sharpness and hardness are crushed by the knocking and rubbing. And at last it is made round. I long to be round." Gertrude Stein once wrote, "Once upon a time the world was round, the moon was round, the lake was round, and I almost drowned. I long to not drown." In a year of 13 moons, 4 seasons in hell. This I pray, dear God, if you are a season, let it be the one I passed through to get here. We have found ourselves almost drowned in sorrow and grime, but I ask, are we yet round? Are our edges softer? Are we ready to be born out of the house, up in smoke, to pursue the next you? Well, happy birthday, baby. So, I propose a bird in space to stand the test of time. Plumage is of all colors. Yet on the whole, yellow deepening to red is more common than blue. This light that does not touch us, does not travel the whole distance. The light that gets lost, the light that does not light on one side, gives us the beauty of the world, so much of which is in the color blue. This process of transformation consists mostly of decay, and then this crisis when emergence from what came before must be total and abrupt. And I think of how the hours passed in this house, and I assure you, they passed. But you did not take my heart alive. I live through a book of reproductions of paintings I love. I can only do so distractedly. I admire this one, but the images are frozen, and this bores me. So I cut them with a kitchen knife and knock them until they become round.
So I'd like to invite Alison and Alex up for a conversation to end this evening.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Alison.
There are so many threads to pull from this talk, but I really want to kind of circle some things back to the exhibition for those of you that have seen it, for those of you that are about to see it, and for those of you that are going to be spending time with it for the next 6 months. You, in this last video, as Duchamp, this is a work that's in the show, Roy G. Biv. You as Duchamp say how much that images that are frozen bore you. I think this is something that we have talked quite a bit about during the installation of this exhibition, your reinterpretation of the permanent collection in tandem with your work. Can you talk a little bit about this and how it relates to the exhibition upstairs?
It's a great observation. It is something I said. I was so happy to be asked to work with you and the museum and thinking through this exhibition and thinking about what painting is. And in kind of casually looking at the collection and just being in the museum, it struck me as strange and funny that the labels that accompany a painting typically in an installation hang, the little didactic that says, this is what it is, this is the title, the artist, and the medium, they're referred to as tombstones. And I thought how strange for a place, a museum, whose mission might be to uphold and bring life to works that have been in the past and yet call them dead on arrival. And so when tasked with the idea of looking back and considering my work in relationship to other deceased artists, I thought it would be nice to kind of distance myself from the language of death or nostalgia or sentimentality and kind of run into the works head on, where I have just landed on Earth and I'm kind of considering what it means to share work, to show work, to speak to the things that I like or I don't like or confuse me in very plain ways or ways that are instinctual, where pairings are not freighted with language, or not freighted in ways that are reliant on didactics, but actually just related to form or theme or even location, and try to kind of begin that way in an effort to kind of distance myself from this sort of stale, kind of dead way that I had seen installations and retrospective installations been considered in the past.
I think another, obviously, theme that runs throughout your work is collage, as you've demonstrated so clearly in this talk. Another thing that you have been speaking about this week is using appropriation as a material, which I think is a really interesting proposition. How do you see that coming into play in your painting practice?
Well, just as you were saying that, I was thinking like, what is collage? And I've just sort of spoken about what I think collage is, but even with appropriation, I used to think as a young person that if I was going through some kind of blues and I traveled to Europe, that somehow I would change or I would be different because of that distance. But, wherever you go, you are. But, the person I was this morning and the person that I am right now are different. And so in thinking through appropriation or duplication, I want to say that the ways in which we're understanding images through time is getting a little bit more confusing because there's so many images, and the ways in which they're stamped or not stamped gets a little bit messier. And the memories that we acquire, so many in a day, get kind of blurry. And the ways in which history had been treated and images had been treated and doubling something had been treated in the past seem to be a little bit more kind of varied now, where your memory or your story might be my story or my memory, and these kinds of ways in which things are shared is much greater. The net is stronger, and the ways in which things can blur edges and redefine themselves are vast and actually quite righteous. So appropriation becomes kind of a matter of just being, and that I somehow have even appropriated myself just from waking up this morning and not having coffee and then having too much of it. for instance.
Speaking of materials, I think viewers to the exhibition have been struck by your use of materials. This is a painting show, but it's not totally a painting show. Can you talk about the materials you engage throughout your work?
Sure. I really don't know anything about painting, but I love a painter very much, and we talk about painting. And the thing about painting that I've always thought was very cool was, say I'm looking at a Philip Guston painting upstairs, or a painting on canvas. What's exciting about it is you think, oh wow, I'm this close to where this painting was made, and that puts me as the viewer kind of in the position of the person who made it, and how wild and fun that is to sort of experientially feel close to this idea and this authorship. My work is invisible. My want as a young person was to be an animator and to work behind the scenes, and part of my desire was to work in the ink and paint department at Walt Disney Studios, which traditionally only employed women in the early 20th century, women who were not credited, and their job was to paint in the drawings, the black ink lines that were on these pieces of plastic called cells or celluloid. So their labor, which was vast and great, would also be kind of messy and blotted on the back side, and then on the front side it would seem clean and kind of sterile. So the painting, the painted part of it, kind of became masked, and the shell of it, the skin of it, the plastic bit of it, became the shield or the glass that kept you away from it. And as I've made my paintings, which are in the spirit of these cells, these glass paintings, it kind of distances you even further, where you cannot see the work. All of the labor is hidden, it's behind the scenes, it's on the edges of the frame. Or say if it's sewn, or if it's made of found objects, or bought objects, or objects I happen upon, their making and their inception is a little more elusive and invisible. And I'm interested in sort of highlighting not necessarily the labor of the author and its making and kind of how that might be considered genius, but sort of looking for that kind of spark or that kind of value in things that are on the periphery.
I think what's really interesting about this talk too is your, and I think relates to so much of your work, is just your focus on the frame by frame, as you mentioned, the animation cell. But I would love to hear more about how you think of cinema as you're planning an exhibition.
So, when you're an animator, and I went to school in the 90s to study animation, and so all of it was analog and pre-digital things, you would have these stacks and stacks of paper that were single pictures, knowing and looking at the single pictures, believing and trusting that they would occupy time and they would move in space. I am not an animator anymore in the traditional sense, but when I'm making shows and making exhibitions and thinking about singular pictures, I'm thinking about them in relationship to time. And so, moving through this particular exhibition, The Whale, I imagine that the very last gallery that you encounter, or for all of my installations, the very last gallery you encounter is actually the middle, and that there is a change from when you enter to when you exit. And then you have to actually leave through the way that you enter often. And so how do you structure a show to kind of think about that timing, where what you walk past on the way in is different than when you walk past on the way out?
I also wanted to come back to early on in this talk, you discussed your first painting, your mural of the Disney villains on the wall, and how the artists and icons contributing to those characters were your small world, were your whale. What do you consider your whale now?
I guess it's hard to tell what my whale is now because I'm in it. When you're in the whale, you actually don't know it, because it's a whale. And you're like happy and it's fine, and then like one day you're not in it and you're like, geez, I was in a whale.
Good answer. Going back to the idea of tombstones too, I'd like to know, what does it feel like to have a survey exhibition as a living artist?
I really stumped you with that. Tombstones 2. Survey. It's funny to revisit these old friends and, enemies. It's because when you make an artwork, you like make it because you couldn't say it and you couldn't write a book, and then you put it into the world and you show it and it goes away, or it goes to storage, or it goes to your mom's house, and then you don't see it again. Hi, Mom. And then it comes back to you, and you have to. It comes back to you maybe, and you have to renegotiate and revisit all the ways in which that intention was at the time and how you're different. There's a lot of reflection involved, because the ways that you made things, the ways that you think about things change. And like I said, in relationship to just waking up and going to sleep, there's so much change in a day. To look at things that were made 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's many things. It's many things. It's not all easy. It's complicated. It's quite beautiful at times. And yeah, my desire when thinking through the show was that I'm not interested in nostalgia, and so I wanted it to be alive. I wanted it to feel alive. If a work that is not owned by me anymore lives in someone's house on a white wall, here has the opportunity to be mixed up with other friends and other paintings on different colored walls in different contexts, and that feels like giving the work more life.
I think that's a great note to end on. I'd like to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions from the audience. So Tiffany has a microphone, and we'll run around for those of you that have questions. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alison.
Right here.
Could you talk a little bit about the vitrines in the exhibit, and specifically the objects that are in them? Like, did you save that Time magazine from 1977 with Lily Tomlin on it, or did you, how did that influence what else was around it? Thank you.
Not that old. I look like Death Warmed Over, but no, I'm not that old. I did save a lot of those things, and some of those things I kind of retroactively bought or sought after. I'm a collector of books and printed matter. It's really all I spend my money on, that and coffee. But I was thinking actually this week, especially how I had saved the Newsweek that from 2005, where the Pope had passed away, Pope John Paul II. And it says, "Go with God." And I had saved that for so long, and that was very meaningful to me then. And just in flipping through my pages, that I drove down here from Philly because I transported that shampoo painting, and I transported all the stuff from the vitrines because they, in fact, mean so much to me. And they are drawings that I made as a young person. There's a drawing that my mother made as a young person. And I do get really attached to these things. But I also want them to resist becoming tombstones. I want them to resist being too precious or relics. I was someone who was very religious and when I was younger and was studying to be in the religious life, and I carried a relic of St. John Newman under my bed. It might have been like a piece of the skin or something, but I was really interested in like these kinds of ways in which material transformed and how it could gain in power and kind of take me away from here. But I don't know if I believe in that kind of magic anymore, or not at least in that kind of magic for the things that I've made. So in putting them in the vitrine, it sort of gets them out of my life and makes them more common. It makes them just the same as the things that I've smashed behind glass, which are rubber bananas and X-Acto blades and stuff I found on the street. I want it to feel like just at a distance in someone else's, a flat mouse.
Hi. I am curious about this image that you've ended on, and clearly you're thinking about time and tombstones, but is this representational of like some other thought about time, and it's maybe about a question about linearity or felt matter?
It's a great question. It is another replica of Felix Gonzalez Torres's Perfect Lover's work, which then here becomes a chess timer, of course. And, you know, it's part of a greater work called Roy G. Biv in this exhibition, which is thinking through histories and things that were fixed and or things that exist in time and how those changes occur, and identifying how time shapes things. You know, the docent asked me earlier what I want when someone goes to this show, and, you know, what do I want a person to feel? And I want nothing of a person. I expect nothing. But in moving through the show, things will change. You will change. The ways you think about things will change. It's inevitable just in being alive. And if you notice those changes and you get sort of hip to these granular ways in which things change, you know, noticing the wrinkle on your face when it shows up, then you're like at a kind of heightened state of being, because you're really in tune with the world and you're looking, and that's what I want. I want people to look.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Christiana.
You mentioned the hidden parts and what you don't see, we don't see when we go through the exhibition. Do you mind making us see some of the hidden parts?
There's so many hidden parts. Christiana, who works here as a conservator and was helping me conserve my work, it was one of the highlights of my time here. We had a chance to work closely looking at Francis Bacon's work, and it was so wonderful and beautiful to sort of see a little bit about how Francis was making his paintings and how cool an opportunity to sort of go beyond the screen. For me, the work in the show is made. It's made by hand, it's made by my hands, and it's many a thing. I think a lot of it is sculptural, and so I would encourage you to like look at the edges, notice how things are, and notice the flaws in them. For every one of those paintings on the wall that has glass in front of it, you can see, if you look, all the mistakes. You can see the scratches, and you can see the fingerprints, and you can see not quite blood, but you can see, you know, the kind of labor and the time in it, and you can see how they change. You know, for instance, the shampoo painting that's in the show called Andromeda from 2012, you know, it was at one point beautiful, sexy, smooth colors, sparkly and radiant, and now it looks like death. And how beautiful it is, but you know, it looks like a fruit that's lost its fun, and it's kind of shriveled up. These are the changes I'd like you to see, and they're apparent and they're everywhere, and in time we'll see them if we give them that time that we have.
Hi. On your tombstone, the introduction to your exhibition, you use the words a range of reinvention, a range of reinvention and subversion. I was wondering, why did you use the word subversion? Because usually it means to destroy or to the act of destroying something. And I didn't really see that in your exhibit. It was more, I agree with the term reinvention, but I was wondering why you came up with that term, subversions.
I guess it depends on who you ask, but most people would say, I cannot believe he remade Andy Warhol's Shot Sage Blue Marilyn, for one. So there's that. I think the subversion is, exactly that. It's not meant to be stated. It's subversive. It's hidden. You have to look for it, and then when you find it, you might say, ooh.
Hi. So during your talk and through the videos, you talked a lot about nostalgia, art history, and collage appropriation. I wanted to see what your thoughts are on that and sort of how American history is operating, ideas around myth of the self-made man, and then how that relates to Zenon's Parable of the Arrow.
I don't know that I'm familiar with the Parable of the Arrow.
Oh, so it relates to the clocks as well.
You could tell me.
Okay, so the Parable of the Arrow is his explanation of why motion does not exist. And if you look at an arrow, you're able to dissect the time to the smallest fragment. Every step of that fragment, the arrow point is still. And so thus motion does not exist.
Okay. I appreciate the explanation. Thinking about myth, I guess I would say this is related to, or kind of is related to my thinking around Muybridge and like beginning studies of human body in motion, which is to say, and back to my thoughts about looking, I think, myths happen over time, and the further we're away from the thing that happened, where something that was active and alive becomes an image, it becomes a picture, it becomes an idea or an icon. And, if I look at my work, where so much of my work is about redaction or isolation and then a kind of reapplication or layering onto other things, it not only calls into question like how it's made a new thing. You take a carrot and a flute and a bunch of neoprene and you have a really nice sandwich. If you it also calls to mind the things that it came from. If you make something very big, you'd say, well, what was all the stuff around it before it was this big? Where did these things come from? It goes back to the origin, and that's how you kind of take away the myth. Which is not to say that there can't be new myths, but if myths are sometimes some kind of truth bended or some kind of occurrence that's been bent, the way to renegotiate them or address them or de-escalate them would be to cut them apart and look at them closer, as you say, and kind of notice the sort of frame by frame.
There's also a danger too, but the only looking at it, or the only looking at it, you can lose some importance. And that is.
Sure, you have to consider the whole. I agree.
Well, we have time for one more. Oh, good, Claire.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Claire.
I would love to hear more about how you consider the white cube in regards to your work and also the museum space, Because one thing that I love about walking through the exhibition is your curation of the permanent collection is a more traditional white cube. You go into Roy G. Biv, which started as a white cube and now is red. And then when your work begins solely, you've obliterated the white cube. So I would love to hear more about your conceptualizing of that.
Thank you for your question. I was just walking through the exhibition with James, the docent, and we were working this out because he asked me, he said, exactly the same thing. He asked, just like, how is your way through this and what is the path? And, you know, I realized that here the first room is paintings that are familiar to the visitors of the modern, but there's only subtle shifts. A remake of a Warhol, a remake of a Marisol, a remake of a Milton Glaser, a remake of a Cat Stevens album. It's just subtle shifts, and not dissimilar to what's on display. Things that are out of the frame, things that are funny, violent, sexy, etc. And then you go to the next room, and there's a presence, a new presence of these tombstones, where it's not just a tombstone. I've given my voice to describe the work at length. In my recent research, extensive research on Roy Lichtenstein, what I discovered was that if you look to his words, his voice from 1961, 2, 3, 4, he was approaching his work in really radical ways. He was a fluxist, hanging with fluxists, never identifying as pop in that moment, and really complicating his work. Over time, art historians and scholars and the people that were framing his work have kind of led the work to a particular place, away from, in some ways, his words and his initial intent. This happens, but in the second gallery, my thought was to give back more voice, a voice, to kind of ground the work in something, or reposition and deposition the old way of thinking about it and reposition to a new place. So by the time you get to the third gallery, now you have the white cube sort of on a pedestal. You have the museum on a pedestal, ready to be reformed and malaligned and mutated and colored. And so then it is painted, and it will be painted and change in time. And so by the time you get to the show, which is about painting, there's actually no paint on the walls. There's shampoo, there's neoprene, there's wood, there's light, but there's no paint. And then you get to the kind of next gallery where you have the tables and the vitrines and these reverse glass paintings, and you're in a space where it's all available to you. All of the tools, all of the ways in which you've arrived at these things that were at one point so opaque or so framed and special and hanging 60 center and kind of in the sort of angelic space are now deformed, but they're also just there. They're on a table and ready for you to be had. And so by the time you get to the back end, to the sort of last gallery, it's chaos. It's sort of my early work. It's where I was experimenting and taking those initial ones and kind of exploding and messing around, and things are garish and ugly and weird. They're not finished. And then you see Martin Puryear's Ladder to Booker T. Washington, and you're set free of that. You're sort of, because you cannot go to a museum and not bump into other things. You know, your life is not your own. You're not like living in a vacuum. You will rub up against the world. And so here is Martin making this beautiful ladder of the world. And, you know, here's this cartoon world right beside it, all fucked up and strange. And you think, it isn't just that, it's this also. And you get to go out, you get to go up, you get to go elsewhere. And so that's my thinking through it. I wonder what yours is.
I think with that, y'all need to all go out and go up and go walk through the exhibition. Thank you, Alex Da Corte and Alison Hearst.